Alright, today what we're going to be talking about is how we take this very simple, very basic round pinch pot and turn it into a much more complex form. And for your class, what we're doing is turning this pinch pot into a sculpted flower pot. So you should have your thumbnail sketches of some of the different ideas that you've planned out. Here was one of mine. I thought maybe a cute like little bunny with my flower pot for my succulent hole up here at the top. Or I thought a very cute little cactus would look really nice with my hole for my cute little succulents here. It might look like little flowers on the cactus. Or my sleeping kitten. Out of those three, I think I'm going to try the bunny. I think that'll be a good challenge. And what we're going to do is visualize how this pinch pot is going to turn into part of my bunny shape. So what I'm going to do is, if you see this bottom portion here, that rounded shape, I think for my sketch, if we can take that pinch pot and turn it on its side just a little bit, if this is the table surface, turn it on its side and let that be our bunny. Our next step is going to be to coil, and I'm going to show you how to do that, but I'm going to build up my coils and move up into the rest of the body, filling up the rest of that form. And then of course we'll add, hand build like little extensions like his thighs and his feet and arms and ears and bunny tail and all that cute stuff as extensions and add-ons later. So that's the plan. So based on that, with my pinch pot, I am going to first start off, I'm going to smooth off my little initials that I carved on there. Then I'm going to decide, since my bunny isn't sitting straight up like this, he's actually a little tilted. I'm going to take my pot on its side like that and give it a little tiny tap to sort of flatten that bottom plane out just a little bit and give me something, a nice shape for it to rest on. And you'll see if I flip that over how that's just very subtly flattened, that right there. That will be my starting point. Now I've got good soft fresh plastic clay here ready to go that we're going to be coiling with. But one really important thing in working with clay, this clay was built the other day and it was sprayed and wrapped up, and it's been sitting and sort of stiffening up and getting slightly to the leather hard stage. This clay is the really soft fresh clay. So whenever you're going to be combining two different pieces of clay, especially one day to the next, it's going to be really important that you learn how to slip and score. Now slipping and scoring means scoring little marks along the edges of where you want to attach two new clay pieces. Now you can use a needle tool like this and just come through and give yourself a whole bunch of scratches. Or we also have ribs that have, they're a little metal rib just like this. I don't have one with me, but it'll have like a little jagged serrated edges too. That's actually the fastest way, is if you just rib and score that surface with those serrated ribs. With scoring, I always tell my students, you want to make sure your score marks are nice and deep. Don't be too precious with this. We want nice deep crevices, and that's going to give us some little pockets for the slip to sort of sit into. So I'm going to set that off to the side for just a minute, and I'm going to show you how I roll my very first coil. So, nice little piece of clay. And you can roll really long coils. I don't tend to work with very long coils just because I think they dry out too quickly for me, so I roll one little bit at a time. But I sort of just start by squishing it, pre-squishing it out into its shape, and very gently giving it a nice little roll. Now, a lot of people will get flat coils, where if your hand pressure is uneven, you'll get it where it's really wide here, but then really skinny here, where it sort of flattens out. That's not the end of the world, don't panic. Just roll it up on that tall edge and just give it a light little push. Just kind of help even that out, and then just keep rolling. You can use both hands. For your coils, I always tell my students, you want your coils to be a little bit thicker than you want them to end up. So for example, if you've got your a clay ruler with you, this is a little bit wider than 1/2 inch. And the reason why is because we're going to be blending this clay to fit onto our pinch pot. As we're blending these coils together, we're taking and sort of smushing and thinning down that clay wall. So if you start with your clay, for example, with your coil as thin as you want your wall to be, this is actually closer to that 3/8 of an inch to a 1/2 inch. Once I blend it down, it's actually going to be much, much too skinny. And then you'll have really thin, really flimsy walls once we blend everything together. So work with your coils a little bit thicker than what you actually need. If they're a little too thick, it's not the end of the world. You can always pinch it out and make it a little bit thinner that way. So I've got my score marks. Now I'm going to pick up some slip that I've got over here. And slip is just that liquefied clay. And in fact, actually, this is mostly water. It's not very much clay. Usually I make my slip a little bit thicker than this. Some people just use water. Some people use really thick slip. Some people use really thin slip. It all will work. So this is a paintbrush out of the Clay Tools, not a painting brush anymore. So don't get brushes out from underneath the sink. Just get the ones from the Clay Tools. I'm going to tap and add some of that liquid slip. Now if the slip is really thick, sometimes I like working with thick slip too, I will just sort of tap and dab it onto the surface. But what you don't want to do is brush and like scrub it onto the surface. You just want to tap it because you don't want to brush down and smooth over all those nice little marks that you just made. So with coiling, I'm going to visualize my shape and what I want my form to do. At this point, I need for the back of the bunny to start coming up here. I need for this side to sort of keep coming up, and I need for this belly part, he's going to have kind of a cute little round belly. I want it to actually go out a little bit more as I'm building it up. So I'm just going to stack my coil around. If you don't have enough, don't panic. Just roll a little bit more. And attach that in, pinch off what you don't need. Now, as far as blending coils, that's going to be just my first little row. What I'm going to do is, you always want to have support on the inside whenever you're blending. But I'm going to take my thumb, holding on the inside with this other hand. I'm going to take my thumb and literally I'm going to pull some of this clay and scrape it down into my pinch pot body. And I'm just literally pulling and scraping, blending those things together. This other little baby coil, that clay's a little bit stiffer. If you've got a whole bunch of slip and it's kind of hard to grip, another thing that you can do is use one of our green little clay tools if your fingers are too slick. Grabbing and blending. Now I'm not too precious with this just yet to try to make sure this is perfectly smooth. I just get a very rough blend to start, and I'm going to work my way, kind of rotate this all the way around the outside. But making sure you've got that hand on the interior to support it. Is very important. Sorry, my classroom lights forget that we are in here working. Blend. Blend. Where there's a seam, I can also blend there, where I fit those two different coils together. Now, on the inside, we're going to do the same exact thing, except this time we'll support it from the outside, and I'm going to take part of that coil and blend it down into. A really common problem that a lot of people do is that they just simply smooth across this way. But that's not actually doing anything to help you physically combine those two pieces of clay together. You have to vertically pull one onto or on top of the other one. And that's going to physically blend that clay. Depending on if you've got like a little overlap, sometimes you can blend some of your pinch pot up and into it. Doesn't really matter. And I'm really not too picky with this here at this very first stage, because I know I'm gonna do a lot more sort of manipulating and editing this here in just a minute. And so that's sort of my first row. Now if I put him back in his direction, you can see I've just got that first row finished. Now since this clay is part of the same clay that I'm using to build my coils out of, a lot of people will say slip and score the whole thing for every row. If this clay and this clay is exactly the same moisture content though, and it's really nice and really soft and plastic, I don't necessarily think you have to do that. That takes up a lot of time. And if you're blending the two pieces together correctly, you shouldn't have really much trouble. You shouldn't really have much trouble getting them to stick and not pop apart later as they're drying. So for that next coil, same thing. I'm going to visualize, I want this to go more up, so I'm going to set it more on top of it rather than continuing to move it out in that direction. So I'm going to go sort of on top, on top. This I still want to go out a little bit, so I'm going to keep going out in that direction for a minute and bring it up to match. And same thing. Now that this clay is the same consistency, I'm just going to skip the scoring and slipping step. I'm a very messy coiler. And I'm just going to go straight to the blending, straight into the pulling some clay onto the other clay. Once your fingers sort of get the hang of it, you can go pretty quickly. I think the thing to not get lost in is trying to be try not to be too precious with it at this stage. We're going to be able to manipulate and edit and pinch and modify this coiling shape a good bit. So just don't be too precious. Don't be too panicked about its smoothness right now. I realize that that's not perfect, and I know that would really bother some people, but I can, as I go, grab a rib, and I can smooth and polish that shape up. So that can happen. So I don't really even worry about that at this stage. I'll let that stiffen up just a little bit. Now, as you start to build your project up and up, kind of finding how to go up versus how to go out is all going to depend on where you put your coil. If you want your coil to go vertically straight up, you need to set your coil directly on top. If you want your project to start to lean outward, you're going to roll your coil to a little bit of the edge of your pot and blend it. If you want your pot to go in, you're going to roll your coil a little bit to the inside. So learning those three stages for how to get your pot to go up, out, or in is really important. Now, if you realize, I'm going to show you one last trick. As you're coiling, if you realize that, oh my gosh, it's going up and out and it's getting way too big and I need to bring it back in, there's a great trick for how to do darts that I will show you. So, let's say that I've realized this is too wide and I want to like taper this in a little bit. While all this clay is nice, soft, and plastic, I can cut out a V shape where I want to narrow and taper it in and make it go a little bit smaller. So if I remove, most people start to panic at this point, but if I remove that V shape, right, and then I pull that together, notice how that's going to take out that width and narrow it down. I call this doing surgery on your clay project. Now, if your clay is really soft and plastic and this is all good fresh clay, I just will come through and I will compress this clay a little bit, blend right over top of it, forcibly sort of pulling one bit of clay over top of the other side, then come in on the inside and do the same thing. So you can see where that rim is. I'll pull some And I kind of sometimes will crisscross it, some that way, some this way. And then I've just made a very small little dart in my project. That works great. Now, if it's clay that's a little bit stiffer and is more towards the leather hard stage, when you cut out that dart, what I would recommend is that you score and slip. So once you have that dart cut, I would score right along those two edges. Give yourself a little bit of slip in there, just because it's not as malleable, it's not as soft, and it's not going to blend together as easily. And then force that together. Wipe off any excess slip. And same thing, blending. If it's really stiff, which mine is not, but if it's really stiff and you're having a hard time keeping those pieces closed and together, a good trick that you can do is on the inside or even the outside. If you see that there's a pretty deep ridge, you can roll a little baby soft coil, and this time it needs to be a very skinny coil. This one is very little. And along that seam, if you don't have clay that will blend from one to the other, I'll lay that little small tiny coil on it and sort of use that as a band-aid patch. I can then kind of squish it into that clay. I'll then take that coil and blend half of the coil to one side. It's a little hard to see down in there, sorry. Half of the coil I'm going to blend to this side, and then the other half of the coil I'm going to blend to the other side. And that will really help patch and help heal wherever you've needed to sort of perform dart-like surgery on a pottery piece. So those are two big tricks for today: how to coil, slipping and scoring that first row of coils, and then building up from there, and how to do darts and take out extra space, extra gaps in your clay if it gets too big.